Good evening, paintballers everywhere. This is Archangel Michael here with Pirate Tech Videos. I've got something fun and interesting to bring you. In association with the GI Brigade, I have the opportunity to give you a first look at maintenance and basic care for the upcoming Tippmann Raider. This is their new all-mechanical rear feeding marker that should be hitting the market sometime in November, tentatively. And made a couple of calls, called in a few favors, and I have the opportunity to tear one down for you, and it should be one of the first, if not the first, tech video out there. So, without any further, let's just dive into it. Now, I will give you a couple of disclaimers. This is the prototype, so there will likely be a few differences between this one and the production version, and this is the prototype of the rental version. So there is going to be both a fleet version and a regular version, although I'm not sure how they're going to differ. There are a couple of screws that I have already loosened and a couple of snap rings that I went ahead and took out just to make this a little quicker to go, but I'll show you where those are as we go. Tools needed. You're going to need a couple of different sizes of Allen wrenches. In this case, a 1/8, a 5/64, and a 7/64. It's also always good to have an O-ring pick, and you will need a small Phillips head screwdriver. In addition to that, you're going to want a little bit of a lubrication for the marker, a little bit of lubrication for the technician, and a snap ring tool, which is one of these guys right here. You can get snap rings apart using just something like a pair of needle nose pliers. I don't recommend it. Buy the right tool. It'll make your life easier, I promise you. So, let's go ahead and start taking this thing apart. To do basic lubrication on the bolt, and one step, you've got two screws you remove, two Allen head screws. They're both going to be the 7/64. 7/64 size, and they're marked. They have this little triangular mark right here and here. And I'm imagining that that will be consistent with the production version. And you just unscrew those guys. Right here and here. And set those aside in something like one of these little parts bins like I keep around to help keep them organized and separate so you don't lose them. And with those two taken apart, the back end just slides free. This separates the back half of the bolt and all of the back half of the breech and firing can of your spool valve and the entire hopper mechanism. Set that guy to the side, and from here, reach in and pull out the bolt, which, to a lot of you players that have been around for a while, this is going to look very familiar. This bolt is virtually identical to the bolts you would find in all of your Smart Part Ion guns from years ago. And as I've been able to check against one that I've got in my old parts bin, I think they'll be interchangeable, but this isn't my gun, so I didn't try cycling a different bolt in it. I think it will, but I won't give you 100% because I didn't test that. That being said, now that you've got that, set that aside, and you can check your breech, make sure everything looks clean and shipshape in there, swab it out if need be, and relube it, and that's your basic bolt and engine, bolt and valve maintenance right there. So very simple to get to that. Now, to break it down even further, one thing you can do that's very easy is to check your breech. This top section right here is a single push button, and it lifts off. And there's a detent, typical Tippmann style finger detent, right here in this that helps control the feed into the breech so that you don't have half-fed balls or issues like that. Since it's completely mechanical, there's no eyes or anything along those lines, they take that little extra step to make sure that it's just a simple drop in. Now, from there, if you need to get further into it, That's where that snap ring tool will come into place. Here at the bottom of the regulator, there's a snap ring that holds the swivel in. Now you can take that snap ring off with one of these guys right here, and after doing that, removing the top half of the receiver from the grip frame is as simple as these two screws here. Those are going to be 1/8 Allen wrenches. Now I've got a little one here on a spinner because it's a little easier than getting the long tool into these, but you can, if you're patient, do it with a standard tool. You don't need one of these. So I'm imagining the Allen wrench necessary to do that will come with it. You just take that guy off, and once again put it over in a little container, something to make sure that you don't lose track of any of those. I always recommend having something like that handy. And once you've got that done and that done, you can push it free right here at the swivel on your regulator stack and pull the grip frame away completely. And the grip frame, you know, look down into there, completely mechanical, no electronics anywhere in that. Set that guy aside, and this gives you the ability to check the fittings and the air tubes on your mechanical two-way valve here, or three-way valve. Two-way valve? Two-way valve, I do believe. Anyways, so if you've used any of your like standard push-in macro line fittings, you'll find this blue disc here is very similar to that. It's just a little bit narrower tube, and the regulator at the top of it is going to have this blowout valve right here in order to prevent you from overpressurizing any of this. So it's regulated for low pressure operation. I believe it's 250. I'm saying 250 because from what I've heard, the blowout is 275. So I can't imagine, obviously it can't be any higher than that. And that right there, unless you need to disassemble any of this, which would exceed basic maintenance, that's all you got to do for the gun half of it. The hopper half, we'll jump into that right quick, is also fairly easy. Now, like I said, I left some of the screws loose to make this fairly quick to get into. Once again, you're going to need that same 7/64, and you'll go through here and remove all of these guys. You don't necessarily have to actually remove them. If you just loosen them enough, when you lift up one of the two halves of this, they'll all stay in place. And you'll be able to see some familiar componentry in here. I'm betting one of them's not quite loose all the way. Let's check these again. Or maybe it's because I've got the lid down. Yep, that's what it was. And you lift that right up and off, and the left-hand shell is the easiest one to separate, although it's fairly symmetrical on the inside of the body shells. Inside, you'll find this section. This is your mechanical hopper system. And if you look at this bit right here, this will all look familiar. This looks a lot like the feed pan that you'd find in your Halo 2s or any of your Z-Series hoppers that GI Sports owns the rights to now. But instead of running that with a motor, the backwards travel of the bolt engages this bead chain right here that's in a captive transfer tube. And that pushes down this system. And on the other end of it, what you'll find, there's a snap clip that holds that in place. I've already taken that off. And underneath these screws here, you'll find some pretty familiar looking components. Making sure, of course, to set these guys aside once again so as to keep track of them. I got one screw right here. It's a little bit tighter than the others. There we go. Not quite loose. That's okay. There we go. And underneath this little cover, you're going to find a ratchet system that looks to borrow several of the components of the cyclone hopper of the Tippmann A5. So what you have here is, instead of using the lightning rod piston that you found in the Cyclone that used bled off air pressure from the A5's valve, you've got the backwards travel of the bolt striking a mechanical push that cycles the Cyclone. And it'll just slip in place just like the Cyclone would. Your little ratcheting spring here, and a lot of the same basic componentry. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the Raider works. Now, for basic maintenance, you want to check that, make sure that you've got an ample amount of grease on there. You definitely want to make sure that you don't run into any wear and tear on that Cyclone. As any A5 owners can tell you over the years, a little brass bushing in there kind of helps with that. So you'll check the conditions of that. And if everything is hunky-dory, you'll go ahead and piece it all back together. Now this section right here, the internal of the ratchet, is not something that you're going to have to care for regularly, I don't imagine. You're not going to end up with lots of broken paint down in there. It's fairly well contained and sealed. So this section right here, you should probably only have to get into periodically. This section right through here, you can open this up and remove those screws. There isn't really much reason to do that, unless you specifically think you have something wrong with that chain. And I am not going to open that particular part up and show you, because the chain has a tendency, if it's not inside its little tube, to get janky, for lack of a better word. So, yes, you can open that. You really shouldn't have to. It's got that right there, and then this guy looks very similar and functions in a manner that's very similar to the rip drive that you used to have on the Halo style hoppers. In order to preload this transfer tube here, you can rotate this, and there's slits cut into the bottom of the hopper shell that allow the edge of these to stick out so you can get to that wheel. And once you've got that there, then this little clip guy right here actually holds all that in place. I had that already removed before shooting this. And sometimes you want to just get a little bit of, sometimes get it in with a fingernail, not all the time. There you go, clips right into place. And that's that. That's the entirety of the hopper system. It drops right back in to its frame. Now, this rain lid that it comes with is not identical to the one off of the Defender. I thought at first from early photos that it was. It's similar, but it's not interchangeable. What I have noticed is that the speed feed lids from the Defender fit into this perfectly. So if you want to put a speed feed on this, that's something that you can pick up. I believe you can hunt those down at a couple of different paintball parts companies, and you'll be able to put those guys in there if you wanted to run this with a speed feed. I don't really know if that's a must-have, but it is an option. So from there, take the top half, drop it right back in, line it up a little bit, and you always want to make sure you've got the hopper lid lined up correctly, because that's going to be the harder thing. And once you've got that done, just tighten all these guys right back up. And I always tell people when you're tightening paintball things, hold it in the tall form. You never really have to crank it down with your Allen wrench the long way. When you do that, you're putting too much pressure on it. You want it to be tight, but you don't need it to be locked in there, because what you're doing at that point is you're damaging the screws, and a lot of times you're putting pressure in places that it really wasn't meant to have it. So that's that part reassembled. I'll set that aside for a moment. Now, one section that I didn't really get into is the regulator right here. And there's another small snap ring right here. And I didn't disassemble this part because, frankly, the snap ring tool I have didn't fit into there well. Besides the point, you can always disassemble that more completely if need be. The regulator is something, however, you're not going to have to service after every couple of gameplays. That's something that you can let sit for a little bit. But it comes apart pretty much identical to most regulators on the market. It's going to be a stacked Belleville washer style regulator spring, and the regulator body unscrews right here to let you get at all of that, where you've got your regulator piston. I believe it is a 7-disc Belleville washer spring stack. But that's that right there. So we'll go ahead and slide this all back into its trigger frame. Once we've got that in place, we'll grab our grip frame screws right here. They are identical, so you don't have to keep track of which end they came from, which is convenient because I know I forgot. And you probably will too. And then lastly, I didn't show the removal, but I will show the reinstallation of this snap ring right here. Which I promise is a lot easier when you're not trying to be mindful of a camera and watch your monitor at the same time. You just spread it apart, push it down into place, let it go, and that holds everything in place. So that's got you to there. Look at your bolt and see whether or not you need any lubrication on it. In this particular case, I have already lubed this up when I was doing my walkthroughs. So we'll just slide that guy back in there, push it forward. Take the hopper end and line everything up. Push it into place. Grab the 2 screws to hold it into place, and in this instance, yes, they are different lengths. The longer one goes on the bottom and smaller one on the top, and that would be pretty obvious because the longer one would be sticking way out and the short one wouldn't engage if it were in the wrong one. Lastly, you take the top part of the feed rail, snap that back into place. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the Tippmann Raider disassembled and reassembled. Now, a couple of points I will throw out on this. It is a completely mechanical gun. I've said that a couple of times. I'm going to stress that one more time. The grip frame that's included in this one does not look like it matches the other Strikers. The spot where you would have your power button is plugged here. So I don't think they intend this to be upgraded to electronic. Not sure if I'm wrong on that. Like I said, this is a prototype version, so there may be an electronics option for it later on. Nothing has been announced at this point, so I'm not speculating any more than to say I think that they could. The barrel on this is going to be autococker threaded, just like the others in the Striker line have been, so they are moving away from the A5 threads, and that means that the range of barrels you already have for your predominantly autococker threaded markers out there are going to work with this guy by and large. I'm not sure whether or not you're going to run into... It looks like you've got a fairly large diameter opening going in, so your larger diameter barrels... outer diameter barrel should be able to be used with this. I know that my Inception barrel fit into it just fine, so that leads me to believe that's a yes. All in all, looking at this thing, getting a chance to pick it up, feel how it's made, there is a fair amount of polymer in it, but that doesn't seem to detract from it. The polymer that's used in it is very robust looking, very thickly sided, so I'm not so much worried about that. I think that this is going to be a solid option as either a early into the sport woodsball gun or potentially as a all-in-one backup marker that you could have in your gear bag. The idea of this being available as a fleet gun for rental fields is also very exciting. So I hope to see these things hit the store soon. They're slotted tentatively for November. I hope that that ends up being accurate. I think there's a pretty high likelihood I'm going to pick one of these bad boys up just to have as a, you know, in case of a rainy day backup gun, you know, because you never have too many of those. Anyways, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you learned a few interesting things about this upcoming marker. This has been Archangel Michael of Pirate Tech Videos, signing off.